Hello and welcome to Friday Night with me, Niall Paterson. This the show where we sort out the wheat from the chaff of the week's news, leaving you just the very best bits. We'll be reviewing all the big talking points of the past 7 days, as well as setting the agenda for the weekend. But first, the headlines this hour. And the opposition leader, described as Vladimir Putin's fiercest critic, Alexei Navalny, dies in jail. President Biden is quick to blame the man he believes is responsible, Vladimir Putin.
Make no mistake. Make no mistake. Putin is responsible for Navalny's death. Putin is responsible.
Also tonight, Prince Harry takes to US TV to talk about his hopes of a royal reunification following the King's cancer diagnosis. And double defeat for the government gives Rishi Sunak an electoral headache as Tory MPs call for yet another change of direction. Coming up, I'm going to be joined by our panel, the comedian and NHS anaesthetist, Dr. Ed Patrick, and the virologist and comedian, Ria Lina. They are here with us until 9 o'clock, giving us their take on the week's news, including, a strain on the special relationship thanks to some harsh words from David Cameron, Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, and some rather naughty words from the Republicans in response. Is this another sign of British diplomatic influence being kissed goodbye? And what about the revelation this week that the Scottish Parliament building is a hotbed of wiki tweaks, changes to Wikipedia pages to make the subjects look better? Politicians tinkering with the truth, heaven forfend. Plus, in the sport, with manager Roy Hodgson recovering in hospital and his replacement already reportedly in place, Crystal Palace ponder how to plan for a swift succession at Selhurst Park. Great to have your company. We are here until 9 o'clock. Hold on tight. It's Friday night. Evening all. President Biden has expressed his outrage at the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, saying that Vladimir Putin is personally responsible. Well, earlier, in a speech filled with emotion and defiance, Navalny's wife Yulia called on the international community to unite to defeat the evil she says caused her husband's death. Well, according to the Russian prison service, President Putin's biggest political opponent had been taken ill and died following a walk at the correctional colony where he was being held. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has our first report.
This was Alexei Navalny only yesterday, not a man visibly on death's door. Laughing and joking with a federal judge in a court hearing. But 24 hours later, Russian state TV was announcing his unexpected demise. After a walk in jail, it said, Navalny had felt unwell and lost consciousness. Doctors tried to resuscitate the activist, say authorities, but failed. Alexei Navalny leaves a wife, Yulia, and 2 children. Yulia was with world leaders at the Munich Security Conference as the news came through, but somehow still found the courage to address them.
You've probably all already seen the terrible news today. I thought for a long time whether I should come out here or fly straight to my children. But then I thought, what would Alexei do in my place? And I'm sure he would be here. He would be on this stage.
Alexei Navalny was known worldwide for his astonishing courage, standing up to Russia's corrupt regime that first poisoned him, then put him in jail, and now it seems has killed him. His death has brought swift condemnation.
He was so many things that Putin was not. He was brave, he was principled, he was dedicated to building a Russia where the rule of law existed and where it applied to everybody. Navalny believed in that Russia. He knew it was a cause worth fighting for, and obviously even dying for.
Alexei Navalny's multiple sentences on trumped-up charges prompted calls in the West for sanctions on Putin. They were repeated today.
Well, there should be consequences because there's no doubt in my mind this man was a brave fighter against corruption, for justice, for democracy, and look what Putin's Russia did to him. They trumped up charges, they imprisoned him, they poisoned him, they sent him to an Arctic penal colony, and he's died. And that is because of the action that Putin's Russia took. No one can look at this regime now and not recognize it for the truly dreadful nature that it has.
Alexei Navalny was a potent critic of Putin's war in Ukraine. Its President Volodymyr Zelensky, also in Germany, blamed the Russian president for his death.
To me, it's obvious he was killed, like the thousands of others who were tortured to death because of this person. Putin doesn't care who dies as long as he maintains his own position.
The Russian leader himself was smiling his way through a photo opportunity with students and engineers. There was no mention of his arch-rival's death. That was left instead to other officials who were making it all sound like just another routine death in jail.
As far as we know, with all the current rules, the Federal Penitentiary Service is engaged in all checks and clarifications. No specific instructions are required because there is a certain set of rules that the service is guided by.
Ordinary Muscovites were paying their respects with flowers in the snow. While most Russians have gone along quietly with their country's slide into totalitarian rule, Alexei Navalny always fought against it, and now it seems has paid the price. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
Well, let's show you the latest pictures from Moscow this evening. Crowds have been gathering in the city centre, paying tribute to Alexei Navalny, and you might suggest that they have done so somewhat bravely, given that the authorities in Russia have warned his supporters not to be joining any protest following his death. Our Moscow correspondent, Diana Magnay, now looks back at an extraordinary life and career of a man who was the Russian regime's fiercest critic.
Alexei Navalny lived and died fighting Vladimir Putin's regime and the corruption at its heart. Banned in 2018 from running in elections, he remained Putin's most powerful political opponent. The one man capable of bringing tens of thousands to the streets. The man Putin famously refused to mention by name.
Navalny is an idea that Russia could be rich, successful, and a well-developing country, a country where we would want to live.
He was stubborn, sarcastic, and charismatic. His YouTube investigations into Putin and his cronies garnering millions of views and exposing graft of the highest order. But it was in August 2020 that Alexei Navalny became a global name when he was poisoned on board a flight from Siberia. The poison was Novichok, a weapons-grade nerve agent that Russia had used 2 years earlier against the former KGB spy Sergei Skripal in Salisbury. Navalny fell into a coma, and for 3 days his wife Yulia fought for him to be airlifted to Berlin, while doctors in Russia dithered over the diagnosis. Under German care and with his family beside him, Navalny slowly recovered. He blamed Vladimir Putin directly for his poisoning and managed to get one of the Russian security agents involved to admit that he'd placed the poison in Navalny's underpants.
Well, we focused on the inner seams. At least those were the parts we treated.
Western countries imposed sanctions for what they said was another Russian breach of the Chemical Weapons Convention. But President Putin laughed it off.
It doesn't mean he should be poisoned. Who needs him anyway? If someone wanted to, they would have probably finished it.
Once he'd recovered, Navalny stunned the world by announcing that he was returning to Russia.
I realized I'm nearly healthy, and the rest I can cure at home.
Many questioned why, but his life's work was in Russia. For him, there was no other choice. He was immediately arrested and imprisoned. The years inside extending into decades as fresh charges were levelled against him, all of which he said were politically motivated. Tens of thousands took to the streets on his return, the largest unsanctioned protests in Putin's Russia. But the crackdown was brutal, and once Putin invaded Ukraine, which Navalny strongly opposed, demonstrations of any kind were effectively crushed. In a remote prison colony north of the Arctic Circle, Navalny's health deteriorated. He knew what would likely come, and he'd forewarned his supporters and encouraged them to keep up his fight.
Если это произошло, это означает, что мы необыкновенно сильны в этот момент, раз они решили меня убить. Ну и нужно использовать эту силу. не сдаваться. Помните о том, что мы огромная сила, которая находится под гнетом вот этих вот чуваков плохих, лишь потому что мы не можем осознать, насколько действительно мы сильны. Все, что нужно для торжества зла, это бездействие добрых людей. Поэтому бездействовать не надо.
Diana Magny, Sky News.
Well, let's bring in Sky's Rachel Venables outside the Russian embassy in London for us. Good to see you, Rachel. What's it like there? We've been looking at pictures in Moscow where some pretty brave people have been coming out to support Alexei Navalny. What about in London?
Well, I can tell you hundreds and hundreds of people have come out to the Russian embassy. There's been this steady flow of people arriving over the past couple of hours. They have packed out the pavements here. I'm on the side of the road by the Russian embassy itself. On the other side of the road earlier, there was something of a vigil where they gathered, people laying bunches of flowers piling high, candles as well being lit, and people tying pictures of Alexei Navalny onto the sides of the road, onto the railings there, also putting up flags, also putting up posters. But now you cannot get anywhere near to that moment of what was a sombre, calm reflection, because, as I said already, the pavements, as you can see, are absolutely packed, hundreds of people all over these roads. And while it started very, very sombre, very quiet, there was a lot of grief in the air. You could see people hugging and crying as they came together in quite a spontaneous moment, a few hours, of course, after the news of Alexei Navalny's death. In the past 20 minutes or so, I would say that the mood has turned more to anger. There have been speeches and there have been loud, vocal, passionate chants from the people here, many of them who are Russians. And actually one woman I spoke to earlier, a Russian woman studying here, as she described her real sense of grief. She said Alexei Navalny was somebody who politically, she said she was more to his left, but she said it didn't matter about the politics. She described him to me as being more about a symbol, she said, a hope, a dream, and it's the loss of that that I think has brought so many people out here to the streets of London tonight.
Rachel, thanks very much indeed. Well, following this programme, my colleague Yalda Hakim hosts a special edition of The World. That will be live from the Munich Security Conference, where, of course, a little earlier today, Yulia Navalny was speaking. That is straight after Friday night at 9 p.m. here on Sky News. Now, let's head to other news now. And Prince Harry has spoken publicly about the King's cancer diagnosis for the first time, saying it could help to reunify the royal family. He was being interviewed on US television and offering an apparent olive branch to help heal the royal rift with his father and brother. Our royal correspondent Laura Bundock reports.
From the snowy slopes of Whistler, a hint frosty family relations are thawing. The Sussexes are here for Invictus, and with them an American TV crew. The ABC's Good Morning America show filming Harry's first interview since his father's cancer diagnosis.
I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
I've also found in my own life that sort of an illness in the family can have a galvanizing or sort of reunifying effect for a family. Absolutely. Is that possible in this case?
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis. The strength of the family unit coming together. I think any illness, any sickness brings families together.
Harry's tone less combative and more conciliatory. And while he said plenty in the past, he stayed quiet about the King. But when asked about life in the US, this was interesting.
How are you enjoying your time living in the US?
It's amazing. I love every single day.
Do you feel American?
Do I feel American? No. I don't know. I don't know how I feel.
Would you think about becoming a citizen?
I have considered it. Yeah.
Yeah. What would stop you from doing it?
I have no idea. I'm here standing next to this with these guys. And the American citizenship is a thought that has crossed my mind, but certainly not something that's a high priority for me right now.
It is a big decision. Taking US citizenship means renouncing his royal title. For now, the focus is here. After Harry's quick trip to the UK, it's been a week of announcements, from a rebranded website to Meghan's return to podcasting, as the Sussexes try to positively promote their work and public image. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
Avon and Somerset police have identified Darian Williams as the 16-year-old boy who died after being stabbed in Bristol on Wednesday evening. Senior Investigating Officer Detective Inspector Neil Mead said the police are working non-stop to establish the circumstances around Darian's death and will not rest until those responsible are brought to justice. 2 people have been arrested after 6 migrants were found on the back of a lorry at Newhaven Ferryport in East Sussex. Ambulances attended the scene and the 6 were taken to hospital. 1 man was detained on suspicion of people smuggling and the other on suspicion of entering the UK illegally. A woman convicted of handing over a 3-year-old British girl for female genital mutilation during a trip to Kenya has been jailed for 7 years. Amina Noor, 40, from Harrow in northwest London, was found guilty last year of assisting a person to carry out the procedure overseas. 6-time Olympic champion Sir Chris Hoy has announced he's been diagnosed with cancer. The former track cyclist shared the news on his Instagram account, saying that he had hoped to keep the diagnosis private, but that his hand had been forced. He added that he has started chemotherapy and currently feels fine. Conservative MPs are urging Rishi Sunak to change course following 2 crushing by-election defeats. But despite the unprecedented swing to Labour, the Prime Minister insisted there was little enthusiasm for Sir Keir Starmer or indeed his party. Our political correspondent Rob Powell has more.
From the West Country to the Midlands, Labour jubilation as the party chalks up 2 big by-election wins.
Last night, people who hadn't voted Labour before went out and voted Labour. So I'm very pleased with both of those results. But there is more work to do. There's a long way to go. And as every football fan knows, you don't win the league by a good result in February.
11,100. Labour's victory started in the early hours with Damien Egan taking Kingswood, a seat that's soon to be abolished, his Tory predecessor having resigned over the government's climate policies. Wellingborough followed a couple of hours later, a thumping swing to Labour, putting Jen Kitchen into Parliament. The former Tory MP here, Peter Bone, was ejected following bullying and sexual misconduct claims. His partner, a local councillor, was the candidate in this vote.
The circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do.
But as Labour celebrate in Wellingborough, there's disillusionment from voters.
I did vote for it, yes, and the wife did.
And have you always voted Labour in the past?
No, I usually vote Tory.
The Labour coming in, I'm afraid that if we don't change course, I'm talking as a Conservative voter, we might lose the next general elections.
But the way the country is at the moment, I think any change would be an improvement. That's all really I can say.
The Tories put little effort into these 2 campaigns, and after a bad start to the week for Labour, fighting familiar claims of anti-Semitism, it's now a near-perfect end.
These results would be a disaster at any time, but the fact we're now months away from a general election makes them close to catastrophic for the Conservatives. And it's not just the big swings to Labour that will worry Tory MPs, because they're also facing a political challenge from the opposite side, from the right-wing Reform Party. The party took sizable slices of both votes. Wellingborough's candidate clear they won't stand aside for the Tories. Isn't the reality that if someone voted for reform at a general election, you're making a Keir Starmer government more likely?
The Conservative Party and the Labour Party are 2 sides of the same coin. There is no party in this country making the case for reduced taxation, reduced regulation, less immigration. There's no party doing it.
Labour reaffirmed, the Tories licking their wounds. Calls to change course have inevitably followed, but time is running out to change this trend. Rob Powell, Sky News in Wellingborough.
Well, let's return to our top story this evening, the death of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Time to bring in our panel this evening, Dr. Ed Patrick, NHS anaesthetist and comedian, and the virologist and comedian, Rialina. She's also a doctor as well. Hey, everyone's really qualified today. Also joining us in our studio, our international affairs editor, Mr. Dominic Waghorn. Dom, let's start with you. I mean, in a sense, we have been here before. We have seen dissidents being, well, as the US president said, killed by Vladimir Putin. So I wonder what might flow from this.
Yeah, we have. But this is a regime that kills people, defenestrates them, throws them out of windows, puts poison nerve agent in their tea, both at home and abroad. And it does so without, it seems, much kind of reaction or sanction from abroad. And as you say, we've had other dissidents being killed and threats in the past. Biden was asked in the press conference he gave about an hour or so ago, you said that if Navalny dies in jail, that there will be major sanctions and consequences. So what are the consequences going to be? And he said, well, that was 3 years ago, before the Ukraine war, and since then Russia has paid a lot of prices and has suffered a lot of sanctions. So it doesn't sound like he's got any new sanctions planned for Russia. So in a sense, that's probably why Putin keeps doing it. He knows he can get away with it. It's difficult for the West to come up with new sanctions against Russia. They have literally thrown the book at them now. But it's extraordinary kind of chutzpah, and Putin doesn't seem to care. He knows he can keep killing these people and getting away with it. I just wonder, though, what it perhaps means for the domestic protests that are against Vladimir Putin, because we were talking about this just before we came on. Now, I think back to 2015, Boris Nemtsov killed on a bridge near the Kremlin whilst he was helping to organise protests against, guess what? Russian military intervention in the east of Ukraine. So we have seen senior figures die before. I just wonder, given how totemic Alexei Navalny was for so many people, whether things might change this time round. Well, we've seen people on the streets of Moscow bringing roses and kind of floral tributes in the snow, and even that act is pretty brave for a Muscovite, given that how brutally oppressed all these protests are. I was there a week or so into the war when the anniversary of Nemtsov's death was marked by a number of very brave Muscovites who came out because they felt they had to mark the anniversary. They would have been followed home, they would have been tracked on their phones and probably warned not to do it again. And at that anniversary was a man called Vladimir Karamurza, who's a British-Russian writer and journalist, very courageous man who just, like Nemtsov, like Navalny, like Khodorkovsky, the oligarch, just believe that Russia has taken a very wrong path and believes that through the rule of law, freedom and democracy, it could have a very different future. Now, he's been locked up as well, Vladimir Karamurza. And anybody who speaks out suffers the same punishment. And if you're an ordinary Russian, if you go out and protest, even if you're going to take roses to the site of a sort of impromptu shrine to Navalny, you are going to be tracked on your phone and you're going to pay some kind of price for it. You certainly are, and we're already seeing people being lifted in and around the Kremlin this evening, having been warned not to be there. I mean, let's bring in the panel. Ed, you're our newbie today, so let's start with you. I mean, it is a sad day for those who would wish to see the rights of Russians to self-determination, but again, having had the chat with Dom there, I'm not sure much will change as a result of this.
Yes, I think it's a very sad day, and he was obviously a beacon of hope as well for a lot of people and galvanised a lot of people. It's an interesting time as well with the what's going in America and about the funding for the war and whether that's going to galvanise things. But you never know what he's going to do next, and I don't think anyone's surprised that this has happened. And it's, as you said, what's going to be the response? Is there going to be a substantial response from the US side? Are people going to make a difference? Because the thing is, if there is no change, if there is no pressure on him, what's going to stop him from doing something again or even worse?
Yeah. Where are you in this?
Well, no, I think, again, we're going to have to see, maybe through Ukraine, everyone's going to start internationally expressing themselves, or we're going to see more funding towards Ukraine because it's the only way to express our international feelings about this. I mean, leaders, it's not just Biden that has spoken out. I mean, France has spoken out. Trudeau called him a monster. So people are clearly unhappy. But I think, actually, interestingly, let's see what BRICS does, other members of BRICS, and see if they actually speak up against this, or whether they're also going to stay silent and just let it continue to happen.
I mean, I have to say, I do wonder how Donald Trump is going to respond to all of this. Have we heard anything from Mar-a-Lago yet? Not yet, I don't think. And I think, as you say, it's interesting to see how it might play into the debate about the money that's still being held up on Capitol Hill. The Senate has voted for the $60 billion worth of aid to go to Ukraine, but the House hasn't. The Speaker is still holding out, not letting it go to a vote. And I think, there will be people who will hope that this outrage, this
terrible murder of a very brave man will persuade those on Capitol Hill to push it through. But I'm not sure it will, because I think, I'm not sure how it'll play in that sort of strange place we are at in American politics at the moment, how much resonance it will have. It'll probably push it a bit, but sufficiently, I'm not sure. But I think it'll certainly lead to more pressure, diplomatic pressure on those countries who've kind of abstained in terms of whether they support the West and push against Russia or not. Maybe persuade them to come a bit more further onto the Western side.
I mean, just on that topic, I mean, of course, it isn't just the Americans who are kind of dragging their heels slightly at the moment. We are seeing a number of countries, including even France, has kind of questioned their commitment to what is going on in Ukraine. But if we back away right now, I mean, what is going to be the end result?
Yeah, well, what's that message send? That's the problem, is that you are at a point where there needs to be a show of commitment, to show a solidarity of the rest of the world together to be against this force, which is, inherently evil with what's going on. If you step away from that, then it's fractured. We all know that history shows that if you're not unified and you can't send that one message together, that's where danger can lie, and that's where people can take advantage of weaknesses. I mean, Ria, I genuinely wonder if anything will change in Russia so long as Vladimir Putin is alive.
Well, I think we'll find out in the next week or so whether or not the Russian people can actually galvanize themselves enough, whether they have that power in their masses to be able to do anything without external help.
Anyway. The thing is, if you protest, or if you look like you're going to a protest in Moscow, when I was there last, they were taking phones off young men as they came out of the Moscow metro and saying, "What's your password?" and going through the phone, and if there's any kind of subversive content or any Facebook references or whatever the VKontakte equivalent is, then you can get taken in for questioning. So even just the use of your phone makes you sort of uninclined to become political. So if you talk to Muscovites about anything political, they just say, "I'm just not political." So effectively, that's how totalitarian control of individuals' minds works. It's just too dangerous to think politically. So you begin not to switch off politically, and it's just far too dangerous to protest and to demonstrate. And that's how they've managed to control it so much.
Dom, thank you so much for your input. You guys stay exactly where you are, because we're getting a lot more out of you before the end of the show. Stick with us, though. Coming up next, what will we be discussing? Well, after a week where we learnt of the alarming rise of anti-Semitism in the UK, how do we combat that type of behaviour? And kissing goodbye to the special relationship. Why David Cameron's warning about President Putin has made some politicians very angry. That's Barack Obama with the Queen there.
Well, we've had a number of pandemics, epidemics, which is well known of plague over the centuries, but the disease never actually went away. It's hidden away in animal reservoirs, usually rodents in certain parts of the world. One of them is Oregon, and the island of Madagascar is another one. So we have to be vigilant, because we occasionally see these sporadic cases. I think worried is not the word. I think concerned really about the knowledge of what these organisms are doing. We need to be vigilant, really, because we need to have the right surveillance systems in place, like we have in Oregon, where if the organism crosses from rodents, from animals into humans, the danger is that it could then spread between humans. It's not happened in Oregon, but it has happened recently in other parts of the world. So surveillance is really, and vigilance is really the word we're looking for in the context of plague. All the common diseases that we've got, or many of them, they've got measles, for example, whooping cough, typhoid, originally were in animals and they spread into humans. And once they start to spread between humans, that's the real danger, because they adapt to humans, the human lifestyle, the human physiology, and they become more of a threat. And that's what happened in the previous plague pandemics, where there was a breakdown in healthcare. In fact, there wasn't any healthcare really in the centuries ago. And so we need to be put in place systems where we can watch the danger of human-to-human spread. Well, there was an outbreak recently in Madagascar where around 30 people died of plague, and that we did see human-to-human transmission. But luckily, in the modern world, we can intervene and prevent these outbreaks. Unfortunately, in the case of COVID, we weren't able to do that, and we saw the consequences because it was such an infectious agent. We have Ebola in Africa, which is periodically emerging. I think the danger is these viruses and germs can evolve.
welcome back. With me this evening and taking a look back at the week's talking points, NHS anaesthetist and comedian Dr Ed Patrick, and the virologist and comedian and doctorate holder, Rialina. I'm feeling significantly underqualified this evening. My poor humanities degrees.
Yeah, we'll call you sir the whole time to make you feel better.
Please do that, please do that. But what we will be talking about now is, I have to say, one of the stories of the week. I mean, one consequence of the war in Gaza has been that heightened tension and awareness of anti-Semitism. This week, count them, 2 Labour politicians, 1 Conservative mayor have been suspended for anti-Semitic remarks. Now, at the same time, a Jewish security charity reported a record number of reports of anti-Semitic incidents in the UK. Yesterday, here on Sky News, we spoke to 2 students who said they simply don't feel safe anymore.
Every morning I wake up and I don't know if I should put on my yarmulke, my skull cap. I don't know if I should do it because maybe this day I'll get attacked. I've had friends who were openly attacked for wearing their kippot over the weekend. They got almost run over.
Our synagogue, which is meant to be a safe space for Jewish students, which is the home of the Jewish Society here at Leeds, was terribly vandalised top to bottom, with paint around the building saying IDF off campus and Free Palestine around the building. You know, I've had swastikas drawn on the cars on my road.
I mean, Ria, the intake of breath, I suspect, says it all. But when we have people like those 2 young students, you know, genuinely feeling afraid because of actions of a nation state, I mean, it's quite something in this day and age.
Yeah, and it reminds me back at the beginning of the pandemic when Asians were being attacked because the virus came out of China, and I feel it's a similar level of a lack of education, fundamentally. At a risk of sounding like Blair, education is needed here to understand, it's such a complicated situation in the Middle East, and people are educating themselves. I think there's a lot more knowledge about the situation than ever was, and I think that's a good thing. But the fact that we are seeing incredibly violent, I think that's really violent to wake up and find that your synagogue has been graffitied in such a manner. To suggest that you're not welcome in your own country, I mean, it is horrendous, but we have to push through. It's such a nuanced situation. We're talking about anti-Semitism. People are confusing it with anti-Zionism. Then you've just got whether or not you can or cannot criticize the state of Israel for being a state. Are 3 unique things that people are conflating, and there's some very innocent people that are being victimized by this.
I mean, I know from conversations with Jewish friends, they're not at the point of packing their bags and leaving the country, but the fact that they've actually genuinely had that conversation was a real shocker to me. I
mean, that's just such a sad state of affairs that we're actually having a conversation like that. And it's all, amongst all of this, it's innocent people that are getting caught up in what is a big political landscape. And that's the really sad thing. We're famed for being sort of an open and welcoming country, and we want to, flourish like that. But to have those sort of issues here and not that understanding, as Ria said, about the education as well, it's frustrating but also very sad.
I mean, it is quite something. Ben Kentish, colleague, works over at LBC, made a point this week. I mean, think of it. Give me another situation in which people would be held responsible for the actions of a government. Syrians living here in the United Kingdom are not living in fear because of what Bashar al-Assad has done. But there are Jewish people living in this country, maybe without even any direct contact with Israel itself, who, because of what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing, are in fear for their life.
Well, I mean, as I said already, it's reminiscent of looking at anyone Asian and thinking that they're automatically infected. In the early 2010s, there was a rise in anti-Islamic behaviours because of the wars that were going on at that time as well. And so we see these spikes, but this feels so acute and so much more potent because of the last 70 years of history and because of how and why Israel came to be in the first place. And so I think that, even though we're only now getting to the end of the lifespans of those people that were there during World War II, it's still very prevalent in memory, in living memory.
Things seem to go in cycles, don't they? Anyway, guys, pause there. Coming up next here on Friday night, of course, we've got plenty more from Ria and Dr. Ed. See, I'm going to keep calling him a doctor, not you. Including the special relationship hitting the rocks. Some US politicians have reacted pretty badly to David Cameron's undiplomatic warning. That's next. Welcome back. It has been a difficult few days for the so-called special relationship between Britain and the United States. Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron wrote an article for an American political website saying he didn't want the West to show the weakness displayed against Hitler in the 1930s, when, of course, it came to standing up to Vladimir Putin. Now, that led to one Republican congresswoman to tell Sky News that Lord Cameron can kiss my... Well, clearly, I'm not going to say a word like that whilst my mother's watching. Hi, Mum. But like all couples, the relationship between the UK and the United States has had its ups and downs.
We therefore here in Britain stand shoulder to shoulder with our American friends.
Yeah, Blair, what are you doing? Leaving. I'm just... You leaving? No, not yet.
They're saying Britain-Trump. They call him Britain-Trump, and people are saying that's a good thing. That they like me over there. That's what they wanted.
Rishi Sunak is now the Prime Minister.
The relationship between Britain and America has been called special since just after the Second World War, but it was far from that today.
David Cameron needs to worry about his own country, and frankly, he can kiss my ass.
Sorry, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's a card, isn't she? But let's talk about the so-called, in inverted commas, special relationship. We've got it on the screen, in inverted commas, because I have to admit, for many a year, I have doubted whether it is more than a collection of letters joined up into two words, whether there is anything concrete to speak of when it comes to the relationship, the special relationship between the UK and the US. Ed, what are you?
Yeah, well, I love how her response there was very American, kiss my... You just wouldn't get a British politician saying that, you know, even if
Not
it was...
sober, anyway.
No, well, no, definitely. I think Boris might say something like that, but in a moment, like, blah, 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 yeah, kiss my... Blah, blah, whatever. So I think the relationship seems to depend on who is president and who is prime minister at the time and how well they gel. And so I think, you know, Boris and Trump obviously was probably a good relationship, and when one of them wasn't there, then it's less of a good one as well. I think overall, we like Americans. I think Americans like us, but it's in a political fashion.
I think that the Brits like to, you know, politically speaking, the Brits like to think they're on a level, and I don't think that we have been for a few years now. I think we had that very strong Reagan-Thatcher relationship. Clinton and Blair had a thing going, and I think Obama definitely had some respect
Bush and Blair as well, let's not forget.
Bush and Blair. I mean, I think, as you said, it's peaks and troughs, but I don't feel recently that relationship has been there. I mean, I think Biden has actually said that he, you know, that he didn't have time for a number of our politicians. But I mean, to be fair, though, MTG there, bless her, but didn't fully understand what she was being asked before. And I think that little clip, if you watch the whole clip, she doesn't understand what she's being asked, and she didn't understand what Cameron was saying in his letter.
I mean, that is the important thing in all of this. It has been Republicans who've been dragging their feet on the hill about getting the funding needed that Ukraine needs to continue, not to win the conflict necessarily, but to actually, you know, stay in the fight. I have to admit, when I read David Cameron's remarks, I thought they were pretty bolshy, you know, for someone who's foreign secretary. I mean, he doubled down on them even after the comments, the retort from Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Isn't it crazy the lengths you'll go to when you're not elected to your post?
I know, it's wonderful, isn't it?
It's almost like he's trying harder, isn't he? He's just trying to, you know, make more of a splash in the pan.
What though about, you know, the other side of November this year, when we might well have Donald Trump back in the White House? I mean, the fact of the matter is, you can respect the office without respecting the man. There has to be a working relationship between Washington, D.C. and London, doesn't there?
There does, but it can also depend on who your foreign secretaries are. So, yes, we may well have Trump in the U.S., but we don't know who we're going to have over here. And I think that even recent events, we talked about the rise in anti-Semitism. You mentioned that we don't know how that's going to play out if Rishi doesn't call a general election until, as he says he will, until autumn or even the late autumn. I think it could be all to play for, depending on how some of these things play out. Because, of course, the relationship between Labour and anti-Semitism is, they've only just come out of special measures a year ago. And so I don't think that we can definitely say it will be Trump, and we can't say it definitely will be Starmer that will be forging that relationship.
Yeah, I think you have a point, but given the kind of the diminution that there has been, Ed, of the United Kingdom on the world stage, simply by merit of us withdrawing from our fairly central role within the European Union, doesn't that mean that we really, really need to get on with the Yanks? Because otherwise, we're pretty much isolated. We've got NATO, we've got all the rest of it,
and pork markets in Asia. Don't forget those.
Of course.
Pork markets in Asia.
But don't we actually have to spend some time focusing on whoever the chap or lady in the White House is, and making them feel a little bit loved?
We like our island. We like being alone. Yes, no, Britain. Yes, empire. No, I think that I think America probably waiting to see what's going to happen, like you said, in the coming months, and it will dictate what's going to happen. Maybe Biden's waiting to see who's going to be rubbing shoulders with, because it's only a short amount of time, especially in a political term as well, and then we see what will happen. I think we need to try and get on with anyone as well as possible, and sometimes we don't put that across, but you're right, we do.
Let's try and squeeze in one final topic before we carry on, and this comes from a report by our People in Politics correspondent Nick Martin earlier this week. Sky News has been told that underinvestment in children's mental health services is resulting in suffering for thousands of people. Now, to try and find solutions, some communities have actually ended up funding their own counsellors to help desperate teenagers who can't get an appointment, and now the NHS is referring people there in an effort to deal with its own backlog. The centre that we focused on was one called the Jade Centre, and there was a kid called Sebastian in it, 11 years old, in desperate need of some kind of crisis mental health intervention. CAMHS, child and adult, you must have come across this in the health service yourself at the moment. There just isn't child and adult mental health provision of a level that we need right now in every part of the country.
It's one of the most underfunded and under-resourced areas, especially in the NHS. Even when you're working as a doctor and you're needing to refer someone, I remember times when it took me a long time to get through to the service that I needed to speak to. And it's not the people that are working there, it's just there isn't that resource, that funding, and it keeps getting stripped away. And now I think we're seeing more and more with things that are happening with young people, especially with all the social media, which wasn't quite as prevalent when we were in our younger days. It just puts people at higher risk and easy access to being higher risk as well. And there just isn't those support networks that are needed. So,
I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the Department of Health changed its name to the Department for Health and Social Care, and we were told at that time about parity of esteem, that we would treat mental and physical health on an even footing. I mean, that just hasn't happened.
No, it hasn't. We're behind that. I mean, the Brits we're very stoic people, and in the whole idea, don't show your emotions, don't bring it outside of the house. I think that's holding it back. But if everybody has a body, and we understand that everybody needs a doctor for the body, but we haven't quite gotten to the point where we realize that everybody really needs to have a checkup for the mind as well. Everybody has a mind, and everybody should be checking in regularly on that. And but as we know from the NHS, there's just not enough money for any of it.
And the criticism that is always made at a time like this is we are all rather more open about our mental health than we were 20, 30, even 10 years ago. The criticism that comes of that is that many people say, look, aren't we just pathologising, normal behaviour, normal emotions, that it is a difficult time when you were a teenager, it is a difficult time when you were a young adult, that we all feel upset, that we all feel down from time to time. Aren't we perhaps taking people who are not mentally ill per se and making them feel worse by telling them that they have some kind of a condition, rather than the old British, pull yourself together and just crack on?
I don't think anyone's saying that people don't have emotions, like bereavement and going through difficult times, difficult financial times, different stresses. How people react to different stresses is very individual, and how much of a stress someone can take that then makes them unwell is very individualised as well. So it's not about the sort of everyday stresses, it's about helping people who are, really are unwell with these things and just need the support. And you never know how much importance one person has on another person, and then the mental health of that other person as well. So it's about that support network for individuals, but also communities as a whole.
And of course, if you or anyone you know has been affected by the issues raised by our talking around this subject, you can always get in touch with the Samaritans. Their helpline, 116 123, or you can email them, Joe, that's jo @samaritans.org. Ed, Ria, we will see you back here again in the 8 o'clock hour when we're going to continue to discuss the news. But coming up next in the sport, well, with Roy Hodgson recovering in hospital, how on earth are Crystal Palace going to play getting in his replacement? That's next.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made.
We beg you to let Madeleine come home.
My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
I've seen people who believe and strive for the American dream, even in the face of disaster.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute.
Okay. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me.
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Welcome back. Let's head straight to Moscow to look at some video in the aftermath of the death of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Earlier we heard from our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn his analysis of how the government in Russia clamps down on all forms of opposition. We have just had these pictures in, I believe, showing two Rus News journalists, it's a local news provider in Russia, being detained by authorities. Of course, people had been told by the authorities in Russia not to come out in numbers, not to protest following the death of Mr. Navalny. These pictures, we believe, show two journalists, Yulia Petrova being detained in Moscow. There are also pictures, we believe, I'm not sure that these are those, but there are other pictures showing the moments before the detention of another Rus News journalist, Alina Kozyshin, in St. Petersburg. So clearly there is something of a protest taking place across Russia, something of a clampdown as well. Well, going into another crucial weekend in the Premier League, there is a lot of uncertainty surrounding Crystal Palace. They've got Everton on Monday, but it's highly unlikely that manager Roy Hodgson will be in the dugout after being hospitalised on the day the club were reportedly about to sack him. Teddy Draper is back with us in the studio. This is a really confusing one. What do we know? I presume it's less what we know and more what people are putting together.
Absolutely. So primarily, Roy Hodgson is stable in hospital, has had tests. 76-year-old Palace manager there for his second stint. Boyhood Palace fan, began his career there, didn't make it as a professional player there, but he is stable. We don't yet know. There are reports speculating, in The Guardian tonight's reporting he won't be there for the game against Everton at Goodison Park, which is huge in the context of the relegation battle for Palace. They're 5 points clear of Everton. Need a result now, only 3 wins since September. But you're right, yesterday morning, Thursday morning, in the UK, Sky Sports News, a lot of sports outlets were reporting that Roy Hodgson was due to be sacked. Only got a few months left on his contract. It was a 1-year contract anyway, and replaced by the Austrian manager, Oliver Glasner, who led Eintracht Frankfurt to the Europa League in 2022 at the expense of Rangers in Seville. But as it stands now, still unclear. The Guardian is reporting tonight that he is set to step down, Roy Hodgson, whether that's because of the health concerns or the fact that he wants to walk away. The club's fans have expressed their discontent with the situation, with the ownership, but also with Roy's place there. He came back to save them from relegation last season. We thought that would just be it, a romantic return after a couple of years away. But he got the temptation of the extra year contract from Chairman Steve Parish. But it looks like Roy Hodgson will no longer be Crystal Palace manager. But as you say, it's still slightly murky in terms of the detail and very awkward for Crystal Palace with him currently in hospital awaiting results of those tests. But all our best wishes to Roy Hodgson at the moment, former England manager, long and storied career around Europe as well.
Indeed, indeed. Plenty more sport for this weekend. Take us through.
Yeah, busy evening, big weekend to come here on Sky Sports News. Details to come in just a second.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
I'm Heather Fisher and I'm here today at the Stratford Olympic Park with Sky Sports News, reporting on literally everything street sports. I'm about to try out for the very first time and have my very first parkour session with the amazing Lin Young. I'm totally new to parkour, right? Can you tell me a bit about it? Like, where did it come from and where are we now?
So it's quite a young sport. It originated in France in the 90s. It's a group of 9 people called the Yamakasi who made it a thing by just going outside. They lived in the outskirts of Paris and just using their environment, the architecture around them, to pretty much just have fun and play with it, interact with obstacles with only using their body. And then over the years it's become super popular, made its way over to England, where it was then called free running rather than parkour.
It's not part of the Olympics yet?
It's not, no.
Could be hopeful?
I think we're still a little bit away from it to be ready for the Olympics, because I think we still have to work out a very fair way of judging, because it is a young sport. It's very informal, it's very subjective.
Is it equal in terms of gender? Does it work in terms of weight category or age?
No, so there's no categories other than men's and women's categories. Usually some competitions will put everyone together. You're not limited by what you're allowed to do and what you couldn't do.
How does someone get into it who doesn't know?
In the UK, luckily, parkour has been recognised as a sport, and there is Parkour UK has a website where you can go on and literally type in where you live, and it will give you gyms around you or spots around you, coaches around you. You could also just go on YouTube, type in parkour tutorials for beginners that help you like step by step, take it really slowly and safely to start your journey.
Should we get going?
Yes.
Let's go.
So to start, we're gonna warm up our legs, see how much power we have in them. You might out-jump me, but we're gonna see. So all we're gonna do is just literally hop up the stairs, see how many stairs you can skip. So it looks something like... Yes, go!
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Thanks, Terry. Time for the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Mild but unsettled this weekend. Further wet and windy spells crossing the British Isles. Most places dry this evening, just a few scattered showers. But the cloud will slowly thicken across Ireland and Western Britain overnight, bringing patchy rain or drizzle, as well as hill and coastal fog. A few clear spells possible in the east.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Welcome back to Friday Night with me, Niall Paterson. Coming up in the second hour of the show, our news reviewers will be helping us with our regular feature, Good Week, Bad Week. Plus, we'll be getting reaction from the United States at the end of a difficult week in their relationship with Russia and the rest of the world. But first, the headlines this hour. And the opposition leader described as Vladimir Putin's fiercest critic, Alexei Navalny, has died in jail. President Biden quick to blame the man he believes is responsible for Navalny's death, Vladimir Putin.
Make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Navalny's death. Putin is responsible.
Also tonight, Prince Harry takes to US TV to talk about his hopes of a royal reunification following the King's cancer diagnosis. And a double defeat for the government gives Rishi Sunak an electoral headache. Tory MPs are calling for yet another change of direction. Our news reviewers, Rialina and Dr. Ed Patrick, are still with me, and they have a big decision to make over who's had a successful 7 days and who's had a week to forget. Certainly, it has been a great week in Greece for supporters of same-sex marriage, following a historic vote. Will it lead to a similar breakthrough in other parts of Eastern Europe? And I wonder what this gentleman will have made of that gentleman of today's news about Alexei Navalny. We'll get reaction from Republicans on Russia and the relationship with right-wing politicians like Donald Trump. Plus, in the sport, why it's no longer ladies first at the Australian Open tennis, as the event considers flip-flopping the men's and women's finals. Great to have your company. We are here until 9 o'clock. Hold on tight. It's Friday night. Evening all. President Biden has expressed his outrage at the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, saying Vladimir Putin is personally responsible. Well, earlier, in a speech filled with emotion and defiance, Navalny's wife, Yulia, called on the international community to unite to defeat the evil she says caused her husband's death. Well, according to the Russian prison service, President Putin's biggest political opponent had taken ill and died following a walk at the correctional colony where he was being held. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has our first report.
This was Alexei Navalny only yesterday, not a man visibly on death's door. Laughing and joking with a federal judge in a court hearing. But 24 hours later, Russian state TV was announcing his unexpected demise. After a walk in jail, it said, Navalny had felt unwell and lost consciousness. Doctors tried to resuscitate the activist, say authorities, but failed. Alexei Navalny leaves a wife, Yulia, and 2 children. Yulia was with world leaders at the Munich Security Conference as the news came through, but somehow still found the courage to address them.
You've probably all already seen the terrible news today. I thought for a long time whether I should come out here or fly straight to my children. But then I thought, what would Alexei do in my place? And I'm sure he would be here. He would be on this stage.
Alexei Navalny was known worldwide for his astonishing courage, standing up to Russia's corrupt regime that first poisoned him, then put him in jail, and now it seems has killed him. His death has brought swift condemnation.
He was so many things that Putin was not. He was brave, he was principled, he was dedicated to building a Russia where the rule of law existed and where it applied to everybody. Navalny believed in that Russia. He knew it was a cause worth fighting for, and obviously even dying for.
Alexei Navalny's multiple sentences on trumped-up charges prompted calls in the West for sanctions on Putin. They were repeated today.
Well, there should be consequences because there's no doubt in my mind this man was a brave fighter against corruption, for justice, for democracy, and look what Putin's Russia did to him. They trumped up charges, they imprisoned him, they poisoned him, they sent him to an Arctic penal colony, and he's died. And that is because of the action that Putin's Russia took. No one can look at this regime now and not recognize it for the truly dreadful nature that it has.
Alexei Navalny was a potent critic of Putin's war in Ukraine. Its President, Vladimir Zelensky, also in Germany, blamed the Russian president for his death.
To me, it's obvious he was killed, like the thousands of others who were tortured to death because of this person. Putin doesn't care who dies, as long as he maintains his own position.
The Russian leader himself was smiling his way through a photo opportunity with students and engineers. There was no mention of his arch-rival's death. That was left instead to other officials who were making it all sound like just another routine death in jail.
As far as we know, with all the current rules, the Federal Penitentiary Service is engaged in all checks and clarifications. No specific instructions are required because there is a certain set of rules that the service is guided by.
Ordinary Muscovites were paying their respects with flowers in the snow. While most Russians have gone along quietly with their country's slide into totalitarian rule, Alexei Navalny always fought against it, and now it seems has paid the price. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
Well, of course, Dominic there with his analysis of how government in Russia can clamp down on all forms of opposition. As if to prove the point, we have just had these pictures of journalists in Moscow being arrested this evening. The videos show Rus News journalist Yulia Petrova being detained whilst covering a rally. Of course, people had been warned to stay off the streets in Russia. Some, of course, would not do that. Others, of course, as journalists, felt the need to be out there reporting. Meanwhile, though, there has been an ongoing protest outside the Russian embassy in London this evening. It's estimated around 1,000 people have been there following the death of Mr. Navalny. Well, our Moscow correspondent Diana Magny takes a look back now at the extraordinary life and career of a man who came to be the Russian regime's most fierce critic.
Alexei Navalny lived and died fighting Vladimir Putin's regime and the corruption at its heart. Banned in 2018 from running in elections, he remained Putin's most powerful political opponent, the one man capable of bringing tens of thousands to the streets, the man Putin famously refused to mention by name.
Navalny is an idea that Russia could be rich, successful, and a well-developing country, a country where we would want to live.
He was stubborn, sarcastic, and charismatic. His YouTube investigations into Putin and his cronies garnering millions of views and exposing graft of the highest order. But it was in August 2020 that Alexei Navalny became a global name when he was poisoned on board a flight from Siberia. The poison was Novichok, a weapons-grade nerve agent that Russia had used 2 years earlier against the former KGB spy Sergei Skripal in Salisbury. Navalny fell into a coma, and for 3 days his wife Yulia fought for him to be airlifted to Berlin, while doctors in Russia dithered over the diagnosis. Under German care and with his family beside him, Navalny slowly recovered. He blamed Vladimir Putin directly for his poisoning and managed to get one of the Russian security agents involved to admit that he'd placed the poison in Navalny's underpants.
Well, we focused on the inner seams. At least those were the parts we treated.
Western countries imposed sanctions for what they said was another Russian breach of the Chemical Weapons Convention. But President Putin laughed it off.
It doesn't mean he should be poisoned. Who needs him anyway? If someone wanted to, they would have probably finished it.
Once he'd recovered, Navalny stunned the world by announcing that he was returning to Russia.
I realized I'm nearly healthy, and the rest I can cure at home.
Many questioned why, but his life's work was in Russia. For him, there was no other choice. He was immediately arrested and imprisoned. The years inside extending into decades as fresh charges were levelled against him, all of which he said were politically motivated. Tens of thousands took to the streets on his return, the largest unsanctioned protests in Putin's Russia. But the crackdown was brutal, and once Putin invaded Ukraine, which Navalny strongly opposed, demonstrations of any kind were effectively crushed. In a remote prison colony north of the Arctic Circle, Navalny's health deteriorated. He knew what would likely come, and he'd forewarned his supporters, and encouraged them to keep up his fight.
Если это произошло, это означает, что мы необыкновенно сильны в этот момент, раз они решили меня убить. Ну и нужно использовать эту силу. Не сдаваться. Помнить о том, что мы огромная сила, которая находится под гнетом вот этих вот чуваков плохих, лишь потому что мы не можем осознать, насколько действительно мы сильны. Все, что нужно для торжества зла, это бездействие добрых людей. Поэтому бездействовать не надо.
We will be with Diana in just a second, but I want to bring you some breaking news reaching us from New York, specifically from Donald Trump's civil fraud case there. The outcome? Well, the judge has just ruled that Eric Trump, his son, and Donald Trump are barred from doing business, in essence, in New York for 2 years. More than that, the judge has ruled that Donald Trump has to pay a $364 million penalty in this fraud case. Interesting information emerging from the case itself. Suggestions, of course, that Donald Trump had inflated his own worth. Appears the judge agrees with them, and certainly his worth is going to be significantly less unless he can get that reduced on appeal. As you can see on screen there, the best part of $355 million will soon be coming out of Donald Trump's bank account. Much more on that in just a second, but let's bring back in Diana Magny, who we were just hearing from there about Alexei Navalny's death. Diana, good to see you. Look, we've been asking this question all night. What chance is there that Navalny's call for resistance will be taken up now that he is gone? Are we likely to see anything change as a result of his death?
I mean, I think, unfortunately, given the political climate in Russia and the nature of repression, we're not. We may do, over the course of a week, see a continuation of what we're seeing now, which is a really impressive stream of people coming out in cities across the country to lay flowers. But even now, we're already seeing the first arrests, and these aren't even rallies, you know, but we're seeing arrests of a few individuals who've decided to come and also hold up a piece of paper. They are promptly arrested. As you reported just now, a journalist in St. Petersburg has been arrested. You know, there were the mothers and wives of the mobilised who've been coming out recently to lay flowers at the tomb of the unknown soldier, and rather than arrest them, the police have arrested journalists covering them going to lay flowers. So, I mean, the extent of the security forces' ability to shut things down, which we've seen ever since COVID, but really picked up during the last 2 years of war, is very, very extensive. And it's just... you know, once you get within the legal system and the charges start coming against you and you're questioned first, and then things get more and more difficult, and then suddenly you're in jail for 5 years for a tweet. And I have seen that happen to so many people, which is why so many people, a lot of them who are supporters of Alexei Navalny, have left the country, and why other people just choose to look the other way. So, you know, when we heard from Alexei Navalny just then saying the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing, it's because he really understands the predicament of people in Russia. And they did nothing even when he was calling on them from inside jail to do more. And I think, unfortunately, there is no one to replace him who has the kind of rallying cry effect that he had.
I think you may have a point there. Diana, for now, thanks very much indeed. Of course, following this programme, straight after, in fact, Yalda Hakim will be hosting a special edition of The World this evening, coming live from the Munich Security Conference, where, of course, a little earlier on today, we heard from Alexei Navalny's wife, Yulia. That's straight after Friday night at 9 p.m. here on Sky News. But let's return to our breaking news, the latest legal action against President Trump. In a ruling a few minutes ago, a judge said that Donald Trump must pay $354 million for fraudulently overstating his net worth. Let's try and explain exactly what is going on here. Our US correspondent, James Matthews, standing by, I'm sure, with all the analysis. So he has to pay the best part of 300 million quid for fraudulently overstating his net worth. I think the one thing we can say with certainty, James, is that his net worth is about to be significantly reduced.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's about a quarter of his net worth as assessed by the likes of Forbes magazine. They reckon that Trump is worth around about 4 times that amount. But yeah, this all stems from Trump building his empire, buying expensive buildings, golf courses, styling himself as the king of New York real estate. Well, certainly the crown has slipped this evening. What he did in trying to raise the money to buy all this property was to inflate the value to the tune of around $3 billion, according to the people who were prosecuting this case. So the likes of Trump Tower, golf courses, various estates around about Manhattan, they were all bought basically on false premises. Trump would claim that they were worth far more than they actually were. His apartment in Trump Tower is a case in point. That apartment, the size of it is 10,000 square feet. He claimed it was 30,000. So that's the kind of game that he was playing, along with others in the Trump organization, including his sons. Now, the penalty that they are going to have to pay and endure for this scam, this fraud, is that, yeah, they pay that money, nearly $370 million, which the people prosecuting this were after, but they're also banned from doing business in their heartland, in New York. Donald Trump for 3 years, his sons Donald Jr. and Eric for 2 years each. So this is a hefty blow to Donald Trump, not just in the pocket, clearly, but also in terms of Donald Trump, the brand. As I say, King of New York, the man who built an empire in Manhattan that propelled him to celebrity status, propelled him also to the White House, on his name and on business success. You look at it now and it looks like it was built on straw. He is taking an extremely hefty hit. And in terms of the cash arrangements for this, Neil, it's not as if he can dodge it, because yes, he will appeal. He said that was always going to be the case. But right now, with this finding, he has to lodge that money so that it's held in a bank, so that it goes to its rightful owner should he lose that appeal. So he's going to have to find a lot of cash in a hurry. Today, the 354, but don't forget, just a couple of weeks ago, he was in it for $85 million. That's what he was sued for by E. Jean Carroll, a woman who he sexually assaulted.
James, we'll be back to you in just a second. Just want to read people a statement from the legal spokesman, Alina Habba, the spokesman for Donald Trump. Here's what it says. This verdict is a manifest injustice, plain and simple. It is the culmination of a multi-year politically fueled witch hunt that was designed to take down Donald Trump before Letitia James ever stepped foot into the Attorney General's office. Countless hours of testimony, this statement again coming from Donald Trump's legal team, countless hours of testimony proved that there was no wrongdoing, no crime and no victim. Given the grave stakes, the statement continues, we trust that the appellate division will overturn this egregious verdict and end this relentless persecution against my clients. Let me make one thing clear. That is these are the words from Alina Habba, his lawyer. Let me make one thing perfectly clear. This is not about Donald Trump. If this decision stands, it will serve as a signal to every single American that New York is no longer open for business. Much, much more, I suspect, on President Trump and his legal woes throughout the programme. But we can actually speak speak again to James Matthews, who's been sitting there listening to this. I mean, as statements go from a lawyer, I'm not sure that I've ever read something quite like that. Plenty of use of adjective, which is not necessarily something that you tend to find from lawyers.
That's right, Neil. Yeah, Alina Habba, very close to Donald Trump, clearly very close to his narrative in all of this. And, you listen to that, and it could have been written by Trump himself, railing against the establishment. And, that works for him politically, doesn't it? The polls show that. There is this entrenched support for Donald Trump that won't listen to anything other than he is the victim of a stitch-up. That's why that statement reads the way it does. That's why we hear Donald Trump speaking like that outside of courtrooms only recently yesterday. I mean, that is his campaign pulpit, the courtroom, outside court buildings, essentially just furthering that narrative that is bought by a large part of the electorate here. And that's the key for him in this election. If people buy that argument, then come polling day in November, they will see him as a victim of injustice, a man who is taking on the establishment. It worked for him in 2016. He hopes it can work for him again. And if it does, it gets him into the White House. And of course, that puts him in a position of power with which he can operate against the trials and the legal difficulties that he faces. 4 criminal trials. Don't forget the first one to take place was fixed yesterday. That's due to start with jury selection on March the 25th. So that statement you read, Neil, expect to hear plenty more of that statement over the coming weeks and months. Sorry
to interrupt, James, but you, I mean, you've already mentioned E. Jean Carroll, that defamation trial. I mean, you know, the $83.3 million paid out by Donald Trump in that instance, and it's had not an effect on the polls whatsoever. I suppose my question's a rather more esoteric one, James. I mean, what does it say about the state of the body politic in the United States that, given all of these court cases, they still feel such disaffection with Washington politics that they'd rather Donald Trump be prime minister, be president than anyone else?
Yeah, president, president here, prime minister, who knows? Who knows where the Donald Trump journey takes him? But you're right. I mean, I think one of the downsides of the system in all of this in the United States that plays into that narrative and the partisan nature of everything is that the people who drive these court cases are elected officials. Democrats prosecuting the man at the heart of the Make America Great Again movement. So you can see how it is easy to spin a particular set of circumstances to suit one's politics. And that's certainly what Donald Trump has done. I think the difficulty he has, Neil, it's fine, yeah, he's got as far as he has thus far, portraying himself as a victim, calling cases like this a witch hunt. But the opinion polls that have him ahead of Biden at the moment, they also indicate that should he be convicted, then when things get serious at the election, but also in terms of selection of the Republican nominee, voters, a sufficient number of voters in key swing states are switched off by the notion of voting or supporting a convicted felon. And there is every chance that that is a scenario they will be presented with. If you look at the calendar, that first criminal trial starts on March the 25th. They reckon it will take 4 to 6 weeks. There is another one in the pipeline, of course, the election interference case due to take place in Washington. Strong evidence in particular on that second one, and that could be done sometime midsummer. The Republican convention is in July. That's when they will pick their nominee or rubber stamp Donald Trump, the way things are shaping up. He will be wary of being convicted in court because that will play badly for him. That's what the opinion polls certainly are telling us at the moment.
James, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up next here on Friday night, our news reviewers, Dr. Ed Patrick and the virologist and comedian, Dr. Ria Lina. She made me do that. They'll be helping us with our regular feature, Good Week, Bad Week. No, not Donald Trump. Instead, we'll begin with why it's been a good week for Greece after the country overcame religious opposition and legalised same-sex marriage. That's
Well, we've had a number of pandemics, epidemics, which is well known of plague over the centuries, but the disease never actually went away. It's hidden away in animal reservoirs, usually rodents in certain parts of the world. One of them is Oregon, and the island of Madagascar is another one. So we have to be vigilant because we occasionally see these sporadic cases. I think worried is not the word. I think concerned really about the knowledge of what these organisms are doing. We need to be vigilant, really, because we need to have the right surveillance systems in place, like we have in Oregon, where if the organism crosses from rodents, from animals into humans, the danger is that it could then spread between humans. It's not happened in Oregon, but it has happened recently in other parts of the world. So surveillance is really, and vigilance is really the word we're looking for in the context of plague. All the common diseases that we've got, or many of them, they've got measles, for example, whooping cough, typhoid originally were in animals and they spread into humans. And once they start to spread between humans, that's the real danger because they adapt to humans, the human lifestyle, the human physiology, and they become more of a threat. And that's what happened in the previous plague pandemics where there was a breakdown in healthcare. In fact, there wasn't any healthcare really in the centuries ago. And so we need to be put in place systems where we can watch the danger of human-to-human spread. Well, there was an outbreak recently in Madagascar where around 30 people died of plague, and that we did see human-to-human transmission. But luckily, in the modern world, we can intervene and prevent these outbreaks. Unfortunately, in the case of COVID, we weren't able to do that, and we saw the consequences because it was such an infectious agent. We have Ebola in Africa, which is periodically emerging. I think the danger is these viruses and germs can evolve.
Welcome back. Regular viewers will know it will be Good Week, Bad Week in just a moment. But first, let's get the thoughts of our news reviewers on that breaking news about Donald Trump. Still with us, Ed and Ria. Let's just calm ourselves down for a second. And of course, there is an appellate court to which Donald Trump's lawyer has been saying that they will be applying. But this is yet another...
Did she do what she needed to do this time to be allowed to apply to the appellate court? Because she screwed it on the last one. She's
not by kind of common legal belief in the United States, the best of lawyers. However, she's fighting her corner. I mean, as I was just discussing with James Matthews there, the idea that this will not have any immediate effect on the race for the White House is one of those things that really just confuses me. But simply put, Donald Trump has a base, and they seem that they'll support him through pretty much anything. Ed?
Well, I mean, it's interesting to see that he's been found guilty of inflating again. I think he's good at inflating things, whether it's his wealth or his stories or his own bravado. But I think it will have an effect. I think people it might divide people, but there's these ongoing investigations, these ongoing court proceedings that they're going to go through, and whether one will have more significant impact than the other is an interesting thought as well.
Still, $355 million. It's more than a kick in the teeth for a man whose business heart, if not his kind of actual heart, was always in New York, and that will be a place where he will not now be allowed to conduct business unless, of course, the appeal is successful.
I mean, well, the first question is that based on what he's actually worth or what he said he was worth? And therefore, can he afford to pay it? Although I'm quite sure he's probably going to use he'll get a lot of donations in order to pay that off if he needs to. But I think the second thing is if he's so confident that he's going to win, it's only for 3 years. He'll be like, oh, I'll be busy being president in those 3 years and I'll come back out and it won't have affected me at all.
Let's move on from Donald Trump. Frankly, we could spend the rest of the show chatting about him, but let's head on to Good Week, Bad Week. And we're going to start on a high. Ria, you think it has been a good week for Greece because of their policy towards same-sex marriage. Explain.
Yes, so they just had a vote yesterday to legalize same-sex marriage in Greece, which will also allow same-sex couples to adopt children, which is wonderful, although they can't use surrogacy, so just to clarify. But it's been a huge move forward. There's been a lot of support in the country. I think some of the delay was because of the Orthodox Church pushing back on this, but it brings them obviously more in line with the rest of Western Europe, which is something that they're keen to do. And they are the first country in that region to legalize it. So it could well be a step and an example set for the rest of that region, which will be a good one to watch.
It does certainly feel, Ed, like something to be celebrated, and particularly because following not that long after, His Holiness the Pope kind of intervening and now suggesting that the priests can bless, not marry people. There's still some way to go within the Catholic Church, but it does feel like there are parts of the world that were pretty slow to catch up to LGBT rights that are finally perhaps getting there.
I think there were lots of parts of the world, I mean, ourselves included as well, we were
course.
slow. And it almost seems like a different time, a different, world that happened. But it's good that it's happened. It's too late, obviously. but, better late than never in this case. And yeah, hopefully we'll see a bit more acceptance and we'll just see, accept people for who they are.
Fingers crossed. Ed, your good week selection, Sir Paul McCartney. Well, I suspect every week's a good week if you're Paul McCartney, but something interesting has happened to something that was taken from him half a century ago.
Yeah, I love this story because I think we can all relate to having lost something and wondered where it's gone. And he's had this guitar which was since 1961 or 62, and it's a bass guitar and it's a very familiar one, and it went missing in about 1971. And so around about 50 years, they don't know where this has gone. And they got a group together, people went to try and investigate. They sent investigators, which I just imagine is just, Facebook groups and Facebook villages all saying, has anyone seen this guitar in their loft? And then eventually, it went worldwide. They thought any collectors had it. They thought someone in Jamaica might have had it, someone in the Far East had it. And then it turned out that the person that had stolen it had gone to a local pub, realised that what they got in their hand was too hot to handle, and they'd asked the landlord to store it. So they went back to the pub. And would you believe it, all these years later?
No.
The guitar is still there.
Still in the boot.
It's where they left it, exactly. It's exactly where they left it.
A modern buried treasure story.
It is a wonderful one at that. Wonderful. I do want to move us on, though, because I'm going to suggest that it has been a good week for the actor Dougray Scott. Now, to mark New York's Tartan Day next month, officials asked him to lead a parade of more than 1,500 pipers, Highland dancers and clan members through the city. Apparently, other well-known, tall, dashing, sophisticated Scottish personalities weren't available. And do you know what? My producers have been on it, mate, all day to see if I can find a picture of myself in a kilt. So, yeah, well, I didn't want to, ruin the mood by showing you my knees. Dougray Scott.
It is important to clarify, by the way, you do mean clan with a C, because that is in New York that you're talking about.
Yes, I did think that as we were...
Very Scottish, not American clan.
I've got to say, in typical American style, however, and you heard my intake of breath there, that they call the Scottish celebration St Andrew's Day Tartan Day does rather stick in my throat a little bit. They could have called it Haggis Day, Tunnock's Tea Cake Day, Ginger Day. No, they called it Tartan Day. But let's move on to bad weeks. And
St Andrew's Day was the 1st of November.
That's right. You are right, because you're a St Andrews grad, aren't you?
I am indeed.
They can't even have it on the right day. They don't even have it on Burns Night. They don't even have it in November.
But I'm looking for... You know how they make Guinness Green for St Patrick's Day? I'm looking forward to tartan whiskey.
Tartan whiskey.
Yeah.
Well, that was always the thing that happened to you at school when you annoyed your technical design teacher. He used to send you off to go and pick up a can of tartan paint from the stores, like being sent for a long stand in the chemistry department. Ed, though, bad week. You think it's been a bad week for Picasso, as one of his paintings might be for the chop.
I think Picasso, Rembrandt, and Warhol. So it's. What's happened is there's an artist called Andrei Malotkin, and as a show for Julian Assange, he has collected all the art into a safe, a £45 million containing safe with acid, and everything will be destroyed in that if Julian Assange should die in prison. But the thing I've got a problem with is that it's all on a 24-hour timer that is reset by someone who's close to Julian Assange. Now, I think, it's a great show. Just Stop Oil get a lot of press from these kind of things. But, I've slept in on my alarms a few times. And I just hate the idea that potentially, someone has just left their phone and they haven't quite made it for the 24 hours and then, boom, it's just all gone up in an acid haze. That would be, poor old Picasso and Rembrandt and Warhol on that.
Yeah, I'm certainly feeling for poor old Picasso, as you've just put it, Ed. Ria, your bad week selection, modern art, I suppose you could call it, Facebook, probably. No, I mean, you haven't seen my wall.
I personally wouldn't. Oh, really?
No.
You just have posts that have done well from Facebook?
Posts of me in a kilt, basically.
Right.
That's all it is, my Facebook account. Anyway.
So a judge has allowed Facebook to be sued or taken to court about how they've created you don't have your rights to your own data, basically, on Facebook. They've said, essentially, if you want to use Facebook, then you're going to have to give us not only your data on Facebook, but also your data on other apps, such as Instagram, they're both owned by Meta, and we have the right to give your data to third parties, and that's it. You can't argue with it, you can't opt out of it, and so they're being taken to court because that's against privacy laws.
Poor Mark Zuckerberg. Let's all shed him a tear.
But I think it's important to say, if you have been on Facebook, so there's about 45 million users in the UK that have been on Facebook in the last few years, then keep an eye on this case, because you might be able to, if it's successful, you might be able to get something out of it.
Yeah, class action means a few £100 in your pocket at the very least, I would have suggested. My suggestion for Bad Week this time, the train company Avanti West Coast. This is I can't quite believe this one. The Train Drivers Union ASLEF sent out this picture we're going to show you in a second of a menopause pack that the company sent to staff. It includes, and I am quoting you here, paper clips to help you keep it all together, a jelly baby in case you feel the need to bite someone's head off, a candle to remind you that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and chocolate because, hey, great excuse to eat chocolate. Right, I'm going to be gender non-specific. Ed, what do you think about this menopause pack?
I'd love to know. I'd love to know who signed this off. I mean, wow, what a thing to sort of really patronising. All those things. I mean, what next? Are they going to just say, OK, for older men, anyone who's got a slightly enlarged prostate, we've got a little pack for you. Here's a sign just hanging on the door. It says it takes me longer to pee. What next is going to happen? I just think it's.
I know what they can use the paperclip for. But it has been designed by a menopause support group within the company. So I think it is important to say that there was a group and there is support, and the company just wants to say we support you when you have menopause. Unfortunately, it's a little bit tone deaf. Like, I think it's the kind of thing that as a woman you could give a close friend.
Yeah.
But it isn't support in itself.
Not all your female staff.
No, and not even sanitary products for when you suddenly have a period after 8 months of no period, or things that you could actually genuinely use.
No.
I'm obviously not going through a menopause, but I do need to write things down anyway, so I don't think that's...
Oh, they gave you a pencil for all the things that you forget, but they didn't give you any paper to write on.
Dr. Ria, see what I did there? Dr. Ed, do you know what? I'm afraid we are going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and well done in your first outing. It's good to have you here. Stick with us on Friday Night with Niall Paterson. Coming up next, well, as arguments continue in the US as to whether to send more support to Ukraine, we'll be asking one Republican how her party will react to the death of Alexei Navalny. That's next. back. Let's get a little more now on our top story, the death of the Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny. Now, of course, the news comes at the end of a week where the United States has been debating its relationship with Russia and President Putin. On Monday night, Donald Trump said he would let Russia do whatever the hell they want to NATO members that don't pay enough for defence.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
Well, on Tuesday, the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, said he was going to drop all diplomatic niceties. He was urging, of course, Congress to support a multi-billion-dollar funding package for Ukraine. Writing for the political website The Hill, he said this: I don't want us to show the weakness displayed against Hitler in the 1930s. He came back for more, costing us far more lives to stop his aggression. I don't want us, indeed, I don't want us to show the weakness displayed against Putin in 2008 when he invaded Georgia, or the uncertainty of the response in 2014 when he took Crimea and much of the Donbass before coming back to cost us far more with his aggression in 2022. And of course, his words didn't go down especially well with entirely everyone in Washington. Our US correspondent James Matthews spoke to the right-wing Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Britain's Foreign Secretary David Cameron says that you should vote through funding for Ukraine. What do you say to that?
I think he tried to compare us to Hitler also. And if that's the kind of language he wants to use, I really have nothing to say to him.
Well, he likened you to an appeaser to Hitler in not voting through funding for Ukraine. Are you an appeaser for Putin?
I think that I really don't care what David Cameron has to say. I think that's rude name-calling, and I don't appreciate that type of language. And David Cameron needs to worry about his own country, and frankly, he can kiss my ass.
But do you think Putin's the good guy in all this?
That's rude name-calling, and he can kiss my... Anyway, joining us this evening, and I'm sure we will be addressing each other in far more polite terms, Kay Bailey Hutchison, former Republican Senator and former US Ambassador to NATO. Kay, great to have you on the programme this evening. I wonder if we might start with the news of the day, the death of Alexei Navalny. Your thoughts on that, and indeed your thoughts on how the Republican Party will respond?
I think it is tragic. I think Navalny has been a spirited leader of his country, trying to bring about a democracy and freedom for the people there. And I think all the evidence appears to show that Putin has killed him in prison. And we don't know all the facts yet, but that's the early indication. And I think it's very sad for the Russian people.
Was there perhaps an inevitability to Alexei Navalny's death? From the point after the attempted assassination via Novichok, he recovered. He made it clear that he was going to go back to Russia. From the moment he landed, was there an inevitability that this would be his end?
He knew that. He had a choice of staying in Germany where he was safe, and he wanted to fight for the people in Russia. And I think that he will be remembered as one of the great heroes of Russia when finally someday they achieve freedom, which we all hope that they will. But today, Putin is showing what he is. He's showing by killing his opposition. He did it with Petroshenko. He most certainly, or Prigozhin, excuse me, and he has done it now with Navalny. And I think that we all see what Putin is, and we hope that the Russian people get a better leader so that they can live in the freedom that we enjoy.
Indeed, indeed. I wonder, though, because, of course, on Capitol Hill at the moment, and we heard a little bit there from Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I'm certainly not asking you to respond to that, but there is this debate ongoing in the Capitol at the moment about the funding for Ukraine, and it does appear to be being held up by the Republican Party. I see Mike Pence has commented directly on the death of Mr. Navalny. He said there is no room in the Republican Party for apologists for Putin. Rest in peace, Alexei Navalny. I wonder if you would agree with that, and indeed what you think your party should be doing as regards that funding.
What they should be doing is what the Senate did, an overwhelming vote to support Ukraine, because we know if Putin defeats Ukraine, that he will go into other countries, including NATO countries, and then our troops will be involved. It will be a bigger war. We need to stop Putin in Ukraine, and the majority of Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, agree with that. There's a procedural issue of getting the bill to the floor now in the House. They are hopefully going to be able to do that. And when they do, there will be an overwhelming vote in support of Ukraine.
It does feel, though, that the world is at something of a tipping point at the moment. And, of course, NATO is one of those organisations that serves as a bulwark against Russian aggression in parts of the world. What is your view on Donald Trump's take on NATO? I understand that he speaks often in hyperbole, but the idea that, you know, potentially the next president of the United States could leave countries, fellow NATO members, to their fate if they hadn't hit the 2% GDP target in terms of defence spending. What do you make of that?
That will not happen. Congress had passed a law late last year that a president cannot withdraw from NATO without a 2/3 vote of the Senate, because this is a treaty and we have put our word and our commitment on the line. I think that President Trump, we all know that he speaks in a different way, but I do not think there is any chance that we would not be the leader of NATO, and a reliable leader of NATO. That's what this country has always been, and I believe fervently that it will be again. I do understand that the kind of communication is off-putting to others, but the fact is there is a large majority in Congress that certainly appreciates NATO and appreciates the fight in Ukraine, and we know that Ukraine must win.
Kate Bailey-Hutchison, it's great to have your conversation and your expertise this evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up next in the sport, you'll be finding out which Premier League club might be coming for Kylian Mbappe this summer.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made.
We beg you to let Madeleine come home.
My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
I've seen people who believe and strive for the American dream, even in the face of disaster.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music.
They're going to cross to us live in a minute.
Okay.
We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that?
Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited.
Hello.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me.
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Welcome back to Friday night. Now, one of the big sporting talking points of the week regards the Australian Open tennis, set to become the first major. This is interesting, to have the women's singles final on the final Sunday of the tournament. So you'd have Teddy Draper, of course, here from Sky Sports.
Good to see you again.
I might as well introduce you, you know.
It's nice to be here.
But so explain this, because currently usually how things go is you have the female final, and this is for most of the slams.
All the slams, yep.
Yeah, so you have the female final on the Saturday or the second last day, and then the men's on the last day. So why are they changing it?
Well, I suppose logistically for Australia being the other side of the world, from a lot of the viewers, it's an issue, but it's also an issue domestically with the timings, the way it worked. We know that Yannick Sinner, I don't know if you remember that epic comeback against Daniel Medvedev this year, 3 hours and 3/4, but it's in the early hours of the morning. We've seen Rafa Nadal win a couple of epic Australian Opens in the early hours of the morning. So the thinking is I think several perspectives. One is logistics, that by putting the men's final on the Saturday, it means that people typically haven't, unless they work shifts like us, wouldn't have a work day the next day. We're not complaining, but potentially people who work Monday to Friday haven't got that work day problem the next day on a Monday. And the women's final, because it's best of 3 sets, same, obviously, prize money across the Grand Slams, but they play 3 sets throughout the tournament. And this year, Aryna Sabalenka defended her title with an hour and 15 minutes gone, which means you'd be looking at sort of 10 p.m. in the East Coast in Australia. So it'd be doable on the Sunday. But also people making the egalitarian point that perhaps it's modern and progressive that we would have the women's final as the crescendo, the climax, not the men's.
You're a big fan of Sadiq Khan's new Lionesses line, then, I take it, yeah? No, but what is the problem with that? I mean, ultimately, these things make money, don't they?
Sure.
And they wouldn't be doing it if this was going to result in them not making quite as much money.
No, I think it is. And Craig Tiley, the head of Australian tennis, looks into this. It's obviously just happened, the Australian Open, so this was unlikely to come even for next year, but they're constantly analysing it and seeing how they could potentially improve it. I mean, some people might like to see the women's final being the best of 5 sets. You know, who knows? Could we have a comeback in some of these finals when they're 2 sets to love and things like that? But
have they ever proposed that before?
I can't remember. I don't think anyone from the organisation has, but I think certainly fans and tennis pundits are intrigued by that, because you never know with the comebacks as displayed by Sinner against Medvedev. You might win 2 sets, but perhaps there's always a comeback in the offing. We're playing best of 5. And we had the epic 5-set Grand Slam final at Wimbledon, didn't we? Carlos Alcaraz against Novak Djokovic. So he could be in for some great matches. But as it stands, it's 3 sets, and it looks like Saturday night tennis, this is for the men.
And just in time for Sky Sports launching a tennis channel. It's amazing, isn't it?
It's amazing. Good timing, yeah.
Plenty more sport. Why don't you run us through it?
OK, brilliant.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
I'm Heather Fisher and I'm here today at the Stratford Olympic Park with Sky Sports News, reporting on literally everything street sports. I'm about to try out for the very first time and have my very first parkour session with the amazing Lin Young. I'm totally new to parkour, right? Can you tell me a bit about it? Like, where did it come from and where are we now?
So it's quite a young sport. It originated in France in the 90s. It's a group of 9 people called the Yamakasi who made it a thing by just going outside. They lived in the outskirts of Paris and just using their environment, the architecture around them, to pretty much just have fun and play with it, interact with obstacles with only using their body. And then over the years it's become super popular, made its way over to England, where it was then called free running rather than parkour.
It's not part of the Olympics yet?
It's not, no.
Could be hopeful?
I think we're still a little bit away from it to be ready for the Olympics, because I think we still have to work out a very fair way of judging, because it is a young sport. It's very informal, it's very subjective.
Is it equal in terms of gender? Does it work in terms of weight category or age?
No, so there's no categories other than men's and women's categories. Usually some competitions will put everyone together. You're not limited by what you're allowed to do and what you couldn't do.
How does someone get into it who doesn't know?
In the UK, luckily, parkour has been recognised as a sport, and there is Parkour UK has a website where you can go on and literally type in where you live, and it will give you gyms around you or spots around you, coaches around you. You could also just go on YouTube, type in parkour tutorials for beginners that help you, like, step by step, take it really slowly and safely to start your journey.
Should we get going?
Yes.
Let's go.
So to start, we're going to warm up our legs, see how much power we have in them. You might outjump me, but we're gonna see. So all we're gonna do is just literally hop up the stairs, see how many stairs you can skip. So it looks something like... Yes, go! Not bad. Now we're gonna go down, so it's a little bit easier because you don't have to generate the power, you just have to try and make it smooth. I'm gonna show you how it could look like.
Okay.
Yes.
What's next, Lynn?
Follow me.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Time for a quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And there is some mild but changeable weather in store this weekend with a mix of bright spells and blustery showers. For much of Scotland, northern England and Northern Ireland, a cold and cloudy evening with a bitter easterly wind. Outbreaks of rain, sleet and hail snow, especially in the north. Further south across the British Isles, milder with scattered showers. Rain and hail snow will persist across northern and eastern Scotland tonight with some drifting of lying snow. Elsewhere, scattered showery outbreaks with clear spells and fog patches. It will be cold in the windy north, milder in the south. The strong easterly winds will bring more rain, sleet and hail snow to north-east Scotland on Saturday. Otherwise, once overnight fog patches lift, it will be brighter and milder overall with scattered showers in the southwest. Showery outbreaks of rain will mainly affect southwest England, Wales and eastern Ireland, with further showers pushing into western coasts of Ireland later.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up next, Yalda Hakim hosts a special edition of The World, reacting to the death of Alexei Navalny.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim, live from the Munich Security Conference on the day Vladimir Putin's most vocal critic, Alexei Navalny, has died. The question everyone's now asking, how? The opposition leader, who was 47, reportedly died inside a Siberian jail. His wife, Yulia, has pointed the finger of blame straight at the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. And that message has been echoed by the United Kingdom, Ukraine, and the United States.
Make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Navalny's death. Putin is responsible.
Tonight, a further